Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible come together to fulfill the story of God.
I'm Fletcher.
And I am Jay, and today's story is about Elijah.
The main, he's probably one of the most famous prophets.
He's pretty up,
He's pretty up there.
Yeah.
He's done some cool things.
Yeah.
I think we have, how many Elijah episodes? Probably one or two.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've told this story.
No.
We told it. Nobody probably listening to this podcast was here. We told it at a youth retreat.
That's right.
At Maple Grove with Abby. Yeah.
That's right.
That's the last time we talked about this story.
That's right. Anyway. There are, we got to find like the bootleg versions of there's like bootleg tapes of the podcast.
Maybe somewhere lying around from the youth retreat we hosted. Yeah.
Oh,
anyway,
man.
Elijah, the prophet.
Yeah, and of course, we always do encourage you to read the stories for yourselves in order to get the whole picture of what is going on. And today's story takes place in 1 Kings chapter 19.
That's right. Well, it's only, I think, 15 chapters, so we're not jumping ahead. Sometimes, I think last time we jumped ahead.
Last time we jumped
a few
ahead,
hundred years.
Yeah, lots.
But
we jumped over a plethora of events.
Yeah, this time, number
Still a
of
plethora
years,
of events.
couple chapters.
Yeah.
Less book.
Right.
than last time.
If you're just tuning in, you're like, what the heck are these guys talking about? Last week we talked about Solomon, who was the king of Israel. He was David's son, and he asked for and was granted wisdom by God. And it's a really cool story. Like the fact that that's what he asked for, and then that God granted it to him and gave him more than he gave him the things that he didn't ask for as well. Go back, listen to last episode. You're going to love it. It's so good. So Solomon reigns in Jerusalem, and he becomes the most successful king in the nation's history. And then he actually fulfills his father's dream by building the temple. And he was very wealthy. He was very influential. The temple was built basically beside his palace. It was everything was built in Jerusalem. And yeah, he was incredibly wise, except he slowly did turn away from God, and he allowed shrines and altars to be built to other gods because of the influence of his many wives and his concubines. And actually, we saw a bit of a hint of this in last week. I don't think we actually touched on it, but he continued to worship in what is referred to as the high places, and that's where some of the pagan sacrifices were taking place in places of worship that were the outside influence of other nations on Israel was happening, and he participated in that, and it just started, things just went kind of off the rails because of that.
And if you remember, or if you go read when God was talking to Solomon, he said, and if you keep my laws and if you keep worshiping me and keeping me first, your kingdom will never end, essentially. He made the same promise to David, and he made it to Solomon. And then you see by the end of Solomon's life, he's basically turned away, and what happens, as you see in what Jay's about to say, things don't go so well right away.
Yeah. So his son becomes king, and that's a good thing. His son, that's good. But the people asked him to be, the people asked his son, Rehoboam, to be gentler and less taxing than he, because Solomon introduced taxes, which was a warning that was given by Samuel way back that said, if you ask for a king, these things are going to happen. And so they asked Rehoboam, they're like, please, can you make it easier on us? And Rehoboam's like, well, let me think about it, and let me ask some people. And that's actually that's wise. People ask you something, you don't give an answer right away. Let me think about it. Let me seek counsel. So he sought counsel from the old men and the young men. And the old men said, lighten the taxes, make it...
The people are tired.
The people are tired.
Give them a break.
And the young men said, tax them more, they'll take advantage of you. And so he comes back and he says, my father disciplined you with whips, and I'll discipline you with whips and scorpions. Which, like, I don't even want to think about what that... How does that even play out? But... because Rehoboam didn't listen.
I hope that's a metaphor.
Yeah. Like, did he tie scorpions to whips? And well, he didn't. He just He raised the taxes. The people didn't listen. They got restless. And there was Jeroboam, who was a leader in his father's kingdom, who came up and he rebelled against the kingdom, and it ended up splitting. Jeroboam ended up going north with 10 of the tribes, and the 2 tribes remained in the south. So the kingdom of Judah was in the south with Jerusalem as its capital, and that was the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And then in the north, it was Israel, which was Samaria as its capital, and that was all the rest of the tribes.
10 other ones, right?
Yeah. And so after Jeroboam and Rehoboam, Israel and Judah had several kings. Mostly they were bad, but some were good, and some who were good led both regions. Most of them, even though they started out as good, though, ended up as bad. Yeah. And things didn't.
You can look up these, like, if you ever look up Israel and Judah king lists, it'll be in red and green, and they'll be like, this king was good and this king was bad and he didn't follow God, or this king sacrificed children and this king rediscovered the law.
I believe there's a few in Judah that remained good until their death. None in Israel remained good. So that just to give you a list of the kings in Judah, there was Rehoboam, Abijam, Asa, and Jehoshaphat. And in Israel, there was Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, and Ahab. And Ahab is where we're going to kind of land things today, because he is the king at the time of this story. And so while Ahab is king, God raised up a prophet named Elijah, and he had been using Elijah to actually call out the king and the queen, who we've covered in previous episodes, Jezebel, and he was calling out their worship of idols. They were abandoning God and they were worshiping idols, and so many people under his rule, his and her rule, were worshiping idols. And so Elijah comes along and he makes a challenge to the prophets and priests of the pagan gods that the people were serving, and we have a whole episode on that you can go back to and listen to. But on the mountain, God reveals himself, and he burns up both sacrifices and all the water. He had poured water on his sacrifice and everything, and God sent a fire that just it lapped everything up and took away the sacrifices. And as a result of this, the priests and prophets of the other gods were run off. They were run away.
I think they said, he's like, kill all the prophets, go send them off, and they chased them off the mountain, all of Israel.
Yeah. And as you can imagine, the queen,
who's in charge of all these prophets
and profited from them, she finds out what happens, and she sentences Elijah to death.
Yeah, I think it says Ahab goes back and he tells his wife kind of what happened, and she's like, "I swear this day that Elijah will not live." And so he books it. The opposite direction.
Gone.
He's gone. And so this story this week takes place near the town of Beersheba, and it's in Judah. It's in the southernmost city in the territory of ancient Israel / Judah. So if you're I think it's in Genesis where they're talking about what the land, what land belongs to them, and it says from Dan in the north all the way to Beersheba in the south, and so it's in the very, very far south. So obviously Elijah ran a long way because he was up in the north and he's all the way in the south by this story.
Right.
And so Elijah also travels to a place called Mount Horeb, which is probably the same mountain as Mount Sinai, which is the mountain where Moses received the law, where Israel camped for a while. And it's located in the south of the Sinai Peninsula. Although we don't actually know which mountain it is exactly, it's in that region of the Sinai Peninsula. And so like we said, Ahab is king at this time, and he ruled in Israel from 874 to 851 BC. And so today's story takes place during King Ahab's rule, probably around 867-ish BC for this story. So Elijah is off. He is running for his life. He girded up his loins and ran.
Gone.
Because the queen wanted him dead, and she has a pretty big reach, so he runs far to the south. It says that he goes to the south, and he leaves his servant in Beersheba and then heads into the wilderness. He takes a day's journey into the wilderness, and he sits under this bush, under this tree, And he starts praying. He's like, all right, God, I'm done. I've had enough. Take my life, God.
Yeah.
Then he lies down and he falls asleep under this tree, under this bush.
That's it.
Then he wakes up all of a sudden and an angel touches him and he says, you got to eat. And Elijah, what's going on? And then he looks up and there's this cup of water and a piece of bread. And then he just kind of eats it and then goes back to bed.
Yeah. There's a meme that's been floating around social media that talks about this, and just like it says, one time Elijah was so depressed that he wanted to die, and he ended up, like, God put him to sleep and gave him a meal, which proves that sometimes all you need is a good nap and a meal and you can clear your head.
There you go. And so he eats his meal and then he goes back to bed. And then one more time he gets woken up by this angel and he says, you need to eat. You got a long journey ahead of you. You're not ready.
That's right.
And so he gets more food. He's out in the wilderness and he didn't bring food. So this angel gives food to Elijah. He eats it. And then he said he ate more and he was strengthened. And he started a journey down to Horeb. And it took 40 days to get there. So this journey is actually like 400 kilometers. If you look on a map, Beersheba around there to Sinai, 400 kilometers. This guy's on a journey.
Yeah.
He's got his bread and water from the angels and he's walking.
Yeah.
And so he's on. And if you hear the word 40, that's often a symbolism. You think 40 days in the desert, 40 years in the desert.
40 should cause your ears to perk up.
Ring your ears a little bit. It's a time of transition, time of change. And so he finally arrives in Horeb at the mountain, and he finds this cave, and he lies down to sleep.
Because he's tired after a 400
kilometer walk. And it says, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, and he said, what are you doing here, Elijah?
Yeah.
What are you doing here? He says, well, I've done all this work for God, right? I've been very zealous, and Israel has rejected you. Israel has torn down all your altars, and he's put up these prophets of Baal and Asherah, and he's put all your prophets to the sword and to death.
And they're trying to kill me too.
They're trying to kill me, but I'm the only one left. And so God says, well, Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord. The Lord is about to pass by. And so Elijah's out on this mountain in the middle of nowhere, by the way. The Sinai Peninsula, it's the desert, it's mountains. And he's standing out of this cave on the mountain. It says the Lord is about to pass by. So he's, I don't know what he's expecting. He's expecting God to pass before him. You might have the image of Moses standing on the mountain. Last time Moses God passed by Moses. He had to pass between two rocks because, and he saw like
God covered his face as he went by.
Moses saw barely a glimpse of God, and it was this great, overwhelming, bright light that he couldn't possibly stand.
Right.
And he says, all right, Elijah, God's about to pass before you.
Right.
And so this is what it says, and it says, then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind was there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've done all this stuff for you, God. I've been zealous, and I've worked, and the Israelites have rejected you and torn down your altars, and they've put up prophets. They've put all your prophets to death and killed them. And I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And so God then tells him, he says, you know what? Go down, and you're going to go to this place, and you're going to find this man, and you're going to anoint him king You're going to anoint this man. His name is Hazael, king of Aram, and you're going to anoint him. And then you're going to go, and you're going to find this guy named Jehu, and he's going to go fight, and he's going to do all these things. And then you're going to go find one more guy, and his name is Elijah.
Right.
And he's going to, Elisha. And he's going to be the one to succeed you. And so Elijah goes and does all these things, but he's sitting at the mouth of God, and we see where God is when we experience him. He wasn't in this fire. He wasn't in this earthquake. He wasn't in this tornado. Yeah. He was in that still small whisper. Yeah. And that's where he met Elijah. It's
so two things that really stand out, which is great, and we're going to probably expand on these things with our guest, but the voice said to him the second time the same words, what are you doing here, Elijah? And to me, I see that as potentially a missed opportunity by Elijah, because he gives the exact same response. Like, I've been zealous for the Lord, and everyone's out to get me, and life is so terrible. Like, that was the first response that he gave, and God said, or the angel of the Lord said, God's about to pass by. To me, when the same question comes, now I would have been just as dumb as Elijah. I would have said the same thing. I would have said that I would have given him my list. I would have been like, oh, and I forgot the first time. This sucks, and this sucks too.
Yeah.
But I see that as an opportunity, actually, to say, I don't even know what to say other than, like, I'm experiencing you, God, or I'm here, right? Like, what do you have for me? And then the other thing is that God ends that exchange by telling him, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel who haven't bowed the knee. You're not alone.
You're not.
You think you're alone. You think the world's against you, and it feels that way, but you're not alone. So let's go.
I'm still doing things, and you're going to go anoint these, and you're going to get things rolling, because I'm going to do more things. It's not over.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're going to talk about this with our guest, and
I hope so.
A little bit about what this story's about.
Uh-huh.
God, we're meeting God in a different way than we have before, and Elijah's meet him, and he's still doing things, even though Elijah's time might be over and he's ready to give up. He's like, no, we're still going, and I'm still going to do stuff, even though it doesn't look hopeful.
That's it.
All right, so see you in a minute.
Don't go anywhere. Hey, thanks for listening. We love that you're on this journey through this podcast with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Questions that you have, or comments or observations, we'd love for you to just check in with us. So send us an email, story@bfmc.org, or connect with us on our Instagram @StoryFulfilledPodcast, and we'd love to hear from you.
And we're back.
We indeed are.
And we have a very special guest today with us, Mr. Henry Dick. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself. Hello.
How are you?
Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, no problem. My name is Pastor Henry Dick, and that's what I've done for the last 40 years. And glad to be here. Presently, I'm serving with the Barrie Free Methodist Church in areas where they need some help. So here we
need
go.
a lot of it.
I was going to say that.
Henry gets the call regularly.
Yeah, so there you go. So we're pleased to be here. It's almost been 20 years since we've put down roots here at the church. So feel right at home here.
That's
awesome.
Great. We love having you here. So we do start off each episode with a question, and today's question, I've formulated it. It includes a little bit of assumption. I'm making assumptions as I ask this question. So in the story that we're looking at one point, God and Elijah are having this conversation, and God's like, Elijah, just go put your head down. Just go take a nap. So I'm making the assumption here that all of us have a routine that involves the occasional nap. So I would like you to share your napping schedule or napping regimen with us. What does your nap life look like?
Oh my goodness.
Interesting.
Oh my.
Henry, do you want to go first?
Sure, that's an embarrassing question, actually. I've been retired for almost 10 years, and my napping experience is quite extensive now that I'm retired. I usually take about an hour and a half, 2-hour nap in the afternoon.
Okay. There
you go.
Usually have lunch and sit up and watch a little bit of TV with my wife, and then I start to nod off. So I go down in the basement and have a little bit of a dodo time.
There we go.
And I usually get up around 3 o'clock and continue with the rest of the day.
There you go.
So, but I'm allowed that because
That's right.
I'm retired.
And is it regular? It's pretty consistent?
Pretty consistent. If I miss it, I missed. Like the other day, I was home and we were home, and I said to Lynn, I said, did I have my nap today? And she said, yeah, you did. So she's there to remind me that if I didn't. So
that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. Well, my schedule is a little hectic right now, so I don't have it super consistent. But every Sunday afternoon, 99% of the time, every Sunday afternoon. Basically, you come home from church, you have lunch, and then I just pass out instantly. Not that I'm working especially hard. I'm not preaching on a Sunday morning. It's, for some reason, I come home, I have lunch, and then it's a good nap. For a solid, hour, 2 hours.
Yeah,
it's reached 3 before, which is not good because then you lose your day. But you wake up and you don't know where you are. But Sunday afternoon naps are my favorite.
That's me as well. Sunday afternoon, and I do think it for me it is related to the Sunday morning experience. Although I'm not preaching every Sunday, well, I do, like, either I'm preaching or I'm a part of worship or I'm leading worship. But I find even Sundays, there have been Sundays where I have no responsibilities, no formal responsibilities, but I get home and I'm zapped. And that's kind of the inner. I have a closeted introvert who comes out Sunday afternoon when I get home, and yeah, I take a nap for. Sometimes it goes on, but football helps to wake me back up, right? So it's like, Jay, you're missing the end of the game. Oh yeah, I gotta wake up, or the next game's about to start. So,
yeah, that keeps you in check.
That's right.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than waking up from a nap and you're like, it's the end of the day. It's 6 p.m.
Right.
You don't know where you are.
Then how
you're
are
half
you going to
asleep.
get to sleep?
Yeah. What happened to the rest of the day, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you end up not knowing what's going on. And, well, this connects hilariously to the story. Is because Elijah's, like, sleeping all day, and then he wakes up. He's like, I need something to eat. God gives him something to eat.
Yeah.
Then he falls back asleep
That's
again,
right.
and so he's exhausted. So we're going to jump into this story about Elijah. We've been talking about he's just left the mountain where God, brought down fire for the Israelites to see. And then he says, go south, because Elijah's he's lost it. He's sad. He's depressed. He doesn't know what's going on, and God just tells him to go.
Yeah. Word has gotten out to Jezebel, and he's in danger.
He's in danger. He has to run.
Yeah.
And so he's in the wilderness all by himself, and he's basically at the end of his ropes. He's like, God, this is it. I'm done. I can't do anything. It's just me. I'm all alone. And that's where we find God encountering Elijah on the mountain. And so we're gonna talk about that, and we have Pastor Henry here, who's very knowledgeable, and he said he's taken all sorts of notes on this story before. But yeah, the first kind of question that I have is, do you see this story, or how do you see this story impacting your ministry or Christian life, in the fact that we feel alone sometimes? Elijah was desperate. He was by himself. He called out to God. I'm the only prophet left. What am I going to do?
Well, I've lived this story. Back in 2005, I had a nervous breakdown, and I know exactly what Elijah was going through. He had a mountaintop experience, right? Defeating the prophets of Baal. And sometimes that mountaintop experience leaves you only one way to go, and that's to crash. And he really put his faith on the line in that experience, because he really, put ourselves in that situation and cry out to God for fire to be dropped from the heavens. I mean, he was really out there on a limb. And God, through his grace, honored that request, honored that prayer, and helped Elijah with that. And so after that, he was really burnt out. He had used all of his energy, all of his energy in performing that, or helping God in that, and so he was ready to crash. He was burned out. I question the fact, you keep saying that he was alone. I question the fact, from my experience, when I burned out and when I crashed, I talk about it as spun a bearing, and it's just not working anymore. And I never felt alone. I always knew that God was with me, but I also knew that I had nothing left to give. So Elijah had experienced God's presence in a phenomenal way, and his life testimony attests to that. And I think here he felt just totally burnt out with nothing left to give.
Right.
And I see God here speaking to him with a tremendous amount of compassion and love. God came to him and said, I'm paraphrasing here, said, you need some rest. Don't feel bad about what you're feeling. Just have some rest and eat and refresh yourself. And in my experience, that period of rest was about 6 months. And God continually said to me, it's okay, we'll get you through this. So I never felt alone, and I never felt apart from God, but I did feel that I had nothing left to give, and all that remained was a sense of utter hopelessness, to the point where, personally, I was suicidal for about 3 months. And had there been a gun in the house, I probably would have picked it up. Whether I would have used it or not, I'm thankful that God prevented me from even exploring that possibility further. But I know how Elijah felt. He was just totally burnt out and had nothing left to give. And so here comes God and says, okay, my son, I'm here with you.
I wonder if, like, and you mentioned he knew God. He knew God was still there. He knew God's presence was there. I wonder if what he was learning had to do with performing in his own strength, and because his complaint to God is, like, you're right. We've said alone, but he's saying, like, there are no others. It's just you and me, God, almost, and I can't keep doing all the work. And I think what God says in the response here is, you're not. You haven't actually done any of the work. It's been me. And in the work that I've been doing, I've actually set out, there's 7,000 others. Like, it's not just you and me, and it's not dependent on your efforts and your work. It's all about my work, and just continue on and allow me to continue to show up and do my work through you. Yeah, I wonder if that was maybe a little bit of the exchange that was going on that he was learning. And I think of my own times in ministry where I've felt kind of and I've never reached a burnout or spun-bearing situation in my ministry, but I've definitely felt kind of exhausted at times. And it's been that realization that I've come to where it's like, I'm exhausted because I'm working harder than I'm allowing God to work. And of course I'm going to be exhausted in that. Right?
I like what you said, Henry. He was fresh off this mountaintop experience, right? He had just seen literally the fires of God come down and do all this this miracle, essentially, and defeated the prophets of Baal and sent them running. You'd think after that experience, it's almost like it's inspirational. You go out and you're like, I've seen this incredible power of God. This should be inspiring. We can do anything. But instead, he came out of that exhausted and overwhelmed and suicidal at his breaking point, and he crashed. Do you have any advice on how we can come out of experience with God and not crash because are we always expecting the same level of appearance from God? Are we always expecting God to show up in these incredibly powerful ways as opposed to letting him do it how he does it in a different way than we're expecting?
That's a good question. I think too that what we are given here is a glimpse of what happened to Elijah, and I think there's a history and a process which leads up to this particular point. So I'm wondering what happened behind the scenes that we are not aware of that caused him to crash. I know in my life there was the whole aspect of, I always prayed that I would get through ministry unscathed. Stupid prayer. Stupid prayer. Because we know that Jesus says in John chapter 17, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So, and I've analyzed till the cows come home why that happened to me, and I'm still not quite sure why. But I do know that when you're in the depths of that kind of a ditch, there's only one thing that can help, and that's the presence of God.
Yeah.
And I think here in this story is a good example how God stoops himself to our level and ministers to us where we are in need. And I think that's the main point of this story. At least it is for me, having gone through a similar situation. If it had not been for God, had not been for my family, had it not been for the church, and by the way, I wanted nothing to do with church for a while, but had it not been for loving Christian people who came around me and ministered to me and upheld me and encouraged me, it would have been even more tough. So Elijah, from that perspective, is alone because it's just between him and God. I had the opportunity of having eventually having a church family, and that's where I really found helpful at BFMC. They came around me and, quite frankly, expected nothing from me, and allowed me to heal, allowed me to build myself up, and I'm always thankful for that. So I don't know if that's answered your question. Probably not, but
no, I think it has. It's you came out of that and you were broken, and what brought you out of it was the presence of God and what He has called His people to do as well is to be God's presence in the world. That's what the church is meant to be, and so getting that around you is
right. And one of the first things I decided to do, that I was not going to be victimized by this.
Right.
Not going to be victimized. And it's amazing how many people came to me, and I shared openly about my situation, how many people came to me and said, I've had the same experience. And I think the key is what we find in John 17, is that Jesus has won the victory. And He does not want us to live as victims. Sure, we get trampled on, we get crushed, we get in despair, but look at what He has done for us. He gave His life for us, He died for us, He fills us with His Holy Spirit. And we can rest on that truth, knowing that it is the truth. And that He will see us through. But we have a part to play in that. We're partners with God in that. If we give up, then we give up. But if we make our minds up through the power of the Holy Spirit and by God's grace that we're not going to be victimized by this, that we're going to move on from this point, it helps the Holy Spirit do His work more effectively in our lives.
Yeah, I think really it comes down to, as you said, it becomes a matter of perspective, which, the mountaintop experiences, we can process those in one of two ways. Look how amazing I am, or look how amazing God is. And when we're reminded that it's God that did that work, then that keeps our perspective in check. And then there's no necessarily coming down from that mountaintop experience. It's just being on the lookout for another exhibition of God's power.
Yeah, in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just looking for, it's like, worship was amazing this morning. I wonder how God is going to show up at home in lunch. I wonder how God's going to show up in my Sunday afternoon nap. I wonder how God's going to show up and you fill in the blanks. And then our life just becomes an expectation of God showing up in each interaction with somebody, and each experience that we have being an opportunity to be that mountaintop experience.
I was going to say, I think that's true under normal conditions.
Right.
But once you've crashed, you take it moment by moment, not even day by day, moment by moment. And I remember waking up some mornings and just feeling devastated and crying most of the day. And the only thing that got me through was tomorrow may be a better day. So under normal conditions, we look to that and we expect that from God, right? I think of Philippians 1:6, be confident of this, that He who began the good work in you will carry it on to completion. That's a promise that God has given us. But when we're when we're in an Elijah experience, you just want to sleep and eat.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that that becomes, like, if we rewind the story a little bit, that becomes the prescription for when we find ourselves in that deep valley, despair and discouragement. He's just longing for the voice of God. He's just longing to hear God's voice, and each encounter, and actually what he's doing he's like, is that the voice of God? Is that the voice? I expected it in this. I expected it in this. I expected it in this. But it's hope for the voice of God. And so when we find ourselves in that deep pit of despair, clinging to the reality that God wants to speak to us will help us, I think, to get by each moment and in expectation of that happening.
And I really like the story of Elijah because, he has this expectation, where am I going to hear God's voice? And he's looking for it. He's in the storm, in the fire, in the earthquake. And like you said, God, he actually lowers himself down and he comes down and he meets Elijah where he is in this small, tiny moment. That's where God was ready to meet him. And so having an understanding of who God is and how he interacts with us, how we interact with him is so important. If you're looking for God always on the mountain with the fire, you're not always going to find him there. That's not where he's presenting himself necessarily. He's going to meet you where you are and where you need to be met. And I really like your point, Henry, on allowing ourselves to be victimized by this situation. Elijah was victimized. Like he was chased down and was hunted down to be put to death. And you can take that in two ways. You can say, well, look at me, I'm beaten and broken. I'm being hunted down, poor me. Or you could say, okay, God, I know you're more powerful than this. How are we going to get through this? And eventually Elijah gets through it, and God's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. He's like, I have all these other people working. You're not alone. And you're going to go do all these things, and you're going to go raise up a guy named Elisha. He's going to be your next he's going to be the next prophet of Israel. I'm going to take this off of you and I'm going to put it on the next one. So Henry, I'm going to ask you this kind of connected. As you're retired in a sense, but not from pastoring. He still works. But have you ever experienced that idea of, okay, it's time to pass on the torch and you're going to take on a different role? So Elijah went from being the main man doing everything to passing it on to Elijah and then being the support for Elisha. Sorry.
Sure. And after I retired officially, then you have to discover, okay, what's your next role, right? Like, what does God want you to do?
You're not dead.
You're not dead. And both Lynn and I had made a pact, so to speak, that we want to be encouragers to those who have or who are coming after us, right? I joke about the fact that I was interim pastor here at the church for 3 years. Supposed to be 3 months, ended up being 3 years. And all of my staff was younger than me. So I had a wonderful opportunity. They thought because of my gray hair, I knew what I was doing and talking about. And because they were younger, they in a sense looked up to me for my experience. So I had the opportunity to mentor them and to be with them and share some of the things that I had learned over the years and just live life with them from my side of the fence to their side of the fence. And so, I think we 100 years from now, we'll all be dead. And then, what have we passed on to those who are left behind, so to speak? So we have the opportunity to bless them and to encourage them. And quite frankly, I think sometimes the senior people need to keep their mouth shut. But at other times, I think they need to be heard.
Right.
So there's a fine balance there, and that's one that personally I struggle with. But hopefully, for the most part, I've nailed the head on or nailed the.
Well,
hit the hammer with the nail. Hit the nail with the hammer.
If you're reading this story, you kind of go, "Oh, God is demoting Elijah. He's saying you're done, you're fired. We're going to find somebody new." But I don't think it's that at all. I think it's okay, Elijah. You've done what you've been set out to do. It's time for somebody else to do it, and you're going to step alongside them. You're going to anoint them to continue. That's just as an important of a role as doing the work is to pass it on so the next people can do it. Your generation and the next generation aren't less important because it's in the future. The role of continuing on and passing it on to future people and mentoring and discipling, that's just as important as actually doing the work by itself.
Well, and I think the double portion that we see in the Elisha story is really, it's not about like Elisha was greater or did better. It's a continuation of Elijah. And I think we see this, even Jesus gives us a double portion when he says, greater works than these will you do, because it's the continuation of his work through us as his followers.
Yeah, that verse is always, I'm like, how are we going to do greater things than Jesus? But you see through the spread and the growth of the church, right? All these metaphors, God's kingdom is like a mustard seed. It starts small and it's going to explode. And that's what we've seen the church do and continues to do. And that's the role that we kind of step in as Christians, is to grow God's kingdom bigger and bigger and bigger. And it just continues to do that. And that only happens because mentors step into mentoring roles and grow the next generation. That wouldn't happen if everybody just decided to be the main performance all the time.
That's right.
You actually have to have people to grow the next people, the next generation.
Yeah.
All right. Henry, we have one last question for you. And it's the question we ask every episode. And so feel free to answer that however you feel led to answer that. But it is, how does this story, the story of Elijah, come together to fulfill the story of God?
Well, I think, and I'm talking personally here, I think personally, one of the things that we can take home with us from this perspective is that whether we're Elijah or somebody else, we are totally, utterly dependent upon God and His goodness to us. It's His grace that will see us through, not our performance, not our actions. It's His grace that sees us through from beginning to end. And that's where I come down and take a look, for example, of the cross of Christ. And it all comes back to the cross, no matter where we are, whatever story it is, it all comes back to the cross. There we have a God who loves us, who cares for us, who's come to earth to be with us in the flesh. And in spite of that, He knows us, knows all of our weakness, knows all of our strengths, loves us, cares for us, and ultimately dies for us, that we might not be victims, that we would be victors through what He has done for us on the cross. I get annoyed sometimes when people live and act as if the cross was not enough, that God also needs our good works. And our good works are a result of being saved, not getting us saved.
Yeah.
And so it's all about grace. And here we have a compassionate God. And I think sometimes in the Old Testament, God is seen as a God of wrath. Here is, in this story, He's seen as a God of compassion and love and grace and mercy and understanding. And that's the God that I serve.
Yeah. I love it.
It's great. That really encompasses it. That shows us, because that's the point of this show, is really to help people understand who God is, the God that you serve, the God that we serve, and that is ultimately pictured in Jesus. But as the Bible says, He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so we see the same God even in this story about Elijah in the Old Testament, in some random passage in the Book of Kings, that you might have heard a few times. It's the same God who loves us, who is compassionate, who is gracious, and yet even will call down fire when it needs to happen. But when we meet Him, he is ready to be compassionate with us.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's everything. Henry, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we might have you on in the future.
You've earned another spot.
You've earned it. Yeah. Well,
I'm truly blessed.
All righty. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye for now.
Bye.